Hello and welcome to the dashboard course by Trump Excel. I am Sumit Bansal, and in this video I will show you two examples to create interactive charts in Excel. So let's get started. Here I have the data for ABC Technology Corporation Limited. This is the dummy data that I've created for this purpose of this video. I have these years 2007 to 14 and I have the numbers for revenue, operating cost, EBITDA and net profit. Now I'll show you how to create this dynamic chart where user has the flexibility to select the year. In this case it is showing 4 years at a time, and the user can use the slider to change the year, and you can see that as I change the slider the year here changes. As of now it is 2009, but when I change the slider it becomes 2010 and 11 and so on. Also the chart title changes accordingly, so here it would show me the data for 2010 to 14, and when I change the slider the change happens. Now let me create another tab. I would show you how to create this from scratch. Let me paste this data here, and I would also copy the width. Now to create this dynamic chart, this cannot be the input data because this is static data, and what I need is that when I change the slider, then this data set should change in a way that it only picks up those data points which lie in that range. So to do that we would have to use the slider, and let me show you first how a slider works. If you go to the developer tab, if you do not have a developer tab, simply right click on any of these ribbon tabs, go to customize the ribbon, and you can check this option developer, and when you will click OK you would have the developer tab available. Now if you go to this tab and you go to insert, you would see that there are a lot of controls here. In this video I will talk about form controls, and here you have many things. You have a combo box, you have a checkbox, you have a radio button, and you also have a slider here. So I would use this scroll bar, and let me show you how it looks. So I would create a slider like this. Now if you click on this slider you can see that this moves, but there has to be something that is happening along with it. You have to link it to the data that is available here with us. So to do that, if you right click on it and you go to format control, it opens the format control tab, and here you can specify a few things. So in this case I would say the current value here is 1 as of now. The minimum value should be 1, the maximum value should be 5, and I'll show you why I am putting in 5. Incremental change should be 1, and incremental changes, when you click on this, how many changes, how much change should happen in the value, and that is 1. And page change, again I would keep it as 1. Page change means that if you click anywhere else, then you can have then it'll move by 1 only. And it asks for a cell link, and here is where we would establish a link. So let me say the cell link here is cell A13, and now when I click OK you can see that there is a value in A13. Now if I change this slider you can see that the value here gets incremented. If I move this slider, then it would get changed between the limits that we have set in, which is 1 to 5, and I'll show you why I have chosen 1 to 5. But let me park this here, let me have this value here, and let me create my data set. Now this data set is not dynamic. I would want a data set which is dynamic and which changes based on this value. So I would select this data and I would paste it here, and I would delete these values, all these values, because these are static. Now I would have to create a formula that makes it dynamic, and to do that I would use the index formula, and I would say in index the array should be this entire data set. I would hit F4 to lock this, and the row number. Now the row number should be guided by this value. If I have selected it as 1, this row should give me the value for 2007 and these data points, but if I make it 2, then it should give me the values for 2008 and all these data points. So to make this dynamic, I would first select this, I would lock it, and then I would add rows to it, and I'll show you why I'm doing this. I would say rows F4 is to F4, and I would lock the first F4, and I would subtract -1 from it. Now if you have a look at this, if I select this entire thing and I hit F9, it gives me 1. But when I would go to the next row, this would become F4 is to F5. So this would return 2, this would return 1, and this would be minus 1. So this thing would become 2. If I change this value to 2 here, then this becomes 2, this is 1, this is minus 1, this becomes 2, and it picks up the data for 2008. So this is how it becomes dynamic, and I'll show you how exactly how it works. And in column number I would say 1. And now when I hit enter, this gives me 2007. Let me drag it down. So I have this data for 2007, 8, 9 and 10. Now if I move this slider by 1, it becomes 8, 9, 10 and 11. If I move it by 1 again, it changes. So now you can see that my data has become dynamic. And the reason is because of the formula that I have used. Now I can improve this formula. I have given the column number as 1. I can even change the column number and make it columns. And I would use F4 is to F4, but I would lock the first F4. Again, when I hit enter now, it gives me the same data, but now I can copy this data to the right. And as soon as I do this, you can see that I have these numbers. Let me change the bold formatting here. Now you can see that in revenue, I have this data set here. But now if I change the slider, this data set changes, it becomes 2008, and I have this data set here. Now I would use this data, this dynamic data, to create my chart. So let me select this data first, go to insert, and here I would select clustered column chart. And as soon as I select this, you can see that I have this data plotted in this chart. As of now, the axis is wrong, the horizontal category axis. It should be 2007, 8, 9, 10. So I would simply go and select switch row and column, and now it is sorted. Now you can see that I have this data here, and if I move the slider a bit, so let me put the slider right below the chart. Now if I move the slider, you can see that this data is changing. These years are changing. It becomes 2009, 10, 11, 12 and so on. You may think that these axis is changing again, the vertical axis, but you can simply fix it. Select this, press Ctrl 1, and here change the maximum bound to the maximum value that is available. In my case it is 247, which is the maximum revenue value, so I would put it at 250. Now when I hit on close, you can see I have this chart available. Let me delete the grid lines. Now when I move this, you can see that it is moving along with this slider. So if I change this to 2009, as in change the slider, this value becomes 3, and now my data here is appropriately picked up from this dynamic data set. So it's not as much a charting trick as much a formula trick. Now let me make some minor improvements to this chart. The first thing that I want to do is I want to plot the net income bar as a line, because for companies profit is usually the most important thing. So I can simply do this by going to this option, change series chart type, and I would select line, maybe this kind of line. But the problem here is you can see that you can barely make out the difference, so you may want to put it on secondary axis. So I would put it on secondary axis, and now you can see that I have this line for net income, and a user would be instantly able to identify the trend. So it is increasing here, it is increasing here, but suddenly in this data range 2010 to 13 there was a slight dip in net profit. So this is something that you can do. Again, you can fix this because it might change accordingly with the data, so you may want to fix the upper bound, and I would make it 30, which was already the case, but I'm still fixing it so that it remains static. So now you have this data ready. I would want to change the chart title, and I would also want to make it dynamic. So in this case I would create something here in this cell. I would say this value, which is ABC Technology Corporation Limited in millions, and I would say ampersand, a space, ampersand, and I would have to select these values. So I would say the lower bound ampersand dash ampersand the upper value. And now when I hit enter, this gives me ABC Technology Corporation Limited in millions 2009 to 12. If you change the slider, you can see that this value changes. And I would make the chart title dynamic by just clicking on it, going to the formula bar. I would hit equal to key, and I would select this cell. And this makes my chart label dynamic in such a way that now when I change this, the chart label would change as well. So now I have replicated the chart that I've showed you here. You can definitely hide all these values. If you're planning to hide the values, do make sure that you have selected this chart. You've gone to design tab, and here you go to select data dialog box, and here in hidden and empty cells you have this option checked, show data in hidden rows and columns. If you do not check this option, as soon as you hide your data, everything would be gone because it will not be visible on your chart. Now you may want to also add a couple of things here. So for example, let me minimize this chart a bit. Let me first change this font. We're like here, a bold thing. Let me put it down, and so it gives me a bit of space to work on. Now you may want to also show what is the trend in revenue or operating cost, EBITDA and net profit in this year range which is selected. So that you can simply do by using a simple formula. This value divided by this value minus 1. And now when I hit enter, this gives me a decimal value. I would convert this into percentage. So I hit Control 1 to open the Format Cells dialog box, and I would change this into percentage. And if I track this for all these cells, I have all these values which are the change in revenue or operating cost or EBITDA. Now if I change the slider here, you can see that even these values change. And now if you want to show some kind of growth in revenue, you can use this again, this technique that we used with the chart title. You have this small box here, and you create something here. You would say is equal to revenue and ampersand space ampersand this value. If I use this data set, you can see that it gives me revenue 0.318181. This is not what I want, so I would have to use a different formula, and I would have to use text formula here, and I would say this is the value, but the format here should be 0.0%. And now when I close the bracket and hit enter, this gives me what I want. Revenue is 31.8%. But you may also want to show an upward arrow or a downward arrow, as we saw in one of the previous videos. In that case, simply go to insert symbols, and here you can select these arrows, whatever arrow you want to select. Let me use these for the moment, and I would hit close. And I can use, and let me do one thing, let me put it in a different cell here. Now I can also do one thing. I can check for a condition here. So I would say ampersand if this value, which is this value, is greater than 0, then I would have this here F4, else I would have the here I would have the upward arrow. So I would use this arrow F4 comma downward arrow in the other case. And now when I hit enter, you can see I have this arrow here in case I make some changes. So here in this data it is always a growing data set, but in case there is a change, for example if this is 155 for example, then you can see that it becomes a downward arrow. Let me Control Z to go back, and now you can simply use this data, select this text box, hit equal to, and select this data here. And now when I hit enter, you can see that I have this value here. So similarly you can have the value for revenue, operating cost, EBITDA and net profit. And if you want to just copy this here, if you just want to copy it here, you can see that this has been replicated for all these. And if now you want, you can simply replicate this text box, change the color. So I would go to home, and I would make this in color of operating cost, and I would change this reference, and I would make it operating cost, this, so it need to be a bit bigger because this value is higher. Or if you want, you can, because this is quite indicative that orange color would indicate operating cost, you can simply leave the revenue part out and you can simply start your formula with text. So now it will be easier for us to fit in our data in this set. Now this is the revenue figure, this is the operating cost figure. Similarly, you can create one for EBITDA and one for net profit. Let me quickly do it just to show you how it works. I would go here, I would change the color and I would link this to this cell, and similarly I would change the color to maybe this color and change the reference to this cell. Now you can simply align these, go to format, align, top align, align, distribute horizontally, and maybe I can shift it in a way where it looks better. Now you have this entire data set. Let me get rid of grid lines. You have this chart here, and if you move, you can see that your chart is changing, your years here are changing, everything is changing along with the values here. So you would instantly know that in this year, in this data range 2009 to 12, the profit grew by 60%, massive 60%. It was a very good time, but when you moved forward, the change was not that good. It was 29.4 in the remaining years. So this is how you can create a dynamic chart. Let me also show you one thing which is not there in the original chart, which I intended to show you, but it is a good to know feature. Again, if I go to the developer tab, you would see that there is something called as the checkbox here. Let me show you how checkbox work. So I would click anywhere and it inserts this checkbox, and here if I type, say I type revenue, I can make something where I would select revenue and revenue figure is available here. But if I do not check revenue, that figure is not available. So what I can do is I can right click here, go to format control, and I would have to give a cell link, and for every checkbox you would have to do that. So let me give this cell as the cell link, and I'll not show you for all these, but I just want to show you for one of the areas. Now if I go and check this, it gives me true, else it gives me false. Now let me use a condition here. I would go to this cell and I would copy this entire formula, and I would say if, I would use an if condition, if this value, and that's it. This value, because it either gives true or false, and that is what if takes as the logical test. The answer should be either true or false. If this is true, then give me this entire formula, but if this is false, then give me not available, and that's it. If I hit enter, you can see that I have not available here, and the value of revenue just goes away from here. If I drag this down, what happens? The revenue figure is gone. Now if I copy and put it here somewhere, maybe here, and I say I want the revenue numbers, as soon as you click on it, the revenue bar appears, but when you deselect it, the bar goes away. The reason being that not available is not plotted in a chart. So when you have not available here, the chart is not plotted, but as soon as you click on it, this cell becomes true and all these values appear again, and you can see that it is here. You may want to do a couple of more things here, because when you do this, when you uncheck revenue, you can see that this bar still exists, it does not go away. So you may want to manually put something here, or you may want to have a cell and format it in such a way that if this is false, then the cell should be colorless and nothing should happen, but if it is true, then the cell color becomes blue and the value appears here. So you can make all those changes, but this is something I wanted to show you, a checkbox. So this gives you a lot more flexibility, it makes it a lot more dynamic. So in case you have all these things, you do not want the revenue numbers, you uncheck it. If you want the revenue numbers, you keep it here. So this is how you can create a dynamic chart. You can see we have used so many different features. We have used a scroll bar, we have used a checkbox, we have used how to make the chart title dynamic, and we've also seen how to create this entire table using a formula. And believe me, it is not a charting trick. I would say this is a formula trick, because this formula does all the work here. So this is how you can create a dynamic chart. Now let's see another example of using dynamic chart in Excel. Here I have some data set for these 20 companies and these 4 KPIs, which is revenue, OPEX margin, EBITDA margin and net profit margin. Now I have created a scatter chart which can plot 2 of these KPIs at one time, and I have given the user a flexibility to select what these KPIs are. So for example, I can ask the user to select from this list. If I say make him select net profit margin, then this chart would instantly updates itself. Similarly, if he can change this, he can make it revenue or whatever choices he select. If in case he makes it revenue, then this chart would automatically update and it would plot the data from this, and you can see that the chart title would change as well, net profit margin versus revenue. So this is how you can create a scatter chart. Now let me show you how to do this from scratch. So I would create a new tab. I would first select this entire data set, go here and paste it, and increase the width as well. Now as I mentioned in the first part of the video, then this data cannot be used. The data has to be somewhere where it is dynamic, so that when a user selects or make a change, then that data updates itself. This is an easier example as compared to the last one. All I have to do is I have to copy this data, paste it here along with the width, and I would delete this because I want the user to input what data point he wants to pick up. He wants to pick up revenue or OPEX margin or whatever. Again, let me go to the developer tab, and here we would insert a combo box. So when I click on it and I put it somewhere in the worksheet, this is how it looks. And I would have to change some properties. I would go to format control, and here I would have to give an input range. Now the input range would be these 4 values. So let me copy it and let me put it here. Let me transpose it. So I have these 4 values. This would be the input for this combo box. So the input range would be these 4 values, which would be visible in the drop down, and there has to be a cell link, and I would say A28 would be the cell link. Now when I click OK and I go to the drop down, you can see that I have these values. When I select revenue, it gives me 1 because revenue is the first item in the list. OPEX margin is 2, EBITDA margin is 3, and similarly net profit margin is 4. I would again similarly create another one. I just pressed Ctrl D to copy it, and I would keep the source intact. I would just change the cell link. It would be A29 now. Similarly, if I make the change here, you can see that this value changes. Now I would create a formula. So I would use the index formula again, and I would select this entire range. I would hit F4 to lock this, and the row number would be nothing but a simple rows formula. The reason being that if I am extracting any data point, I would want the first value of this data set here, the second value here, the third value here. So I can simply use a row function, rows function, and I would fix the first reference, which is G1, so that when it goes down, it would become G2, G3, G4, and so on. And in column number, I would simply come down here and select A28, and I would hit F4 to lock this. Now when I hit enter, it gives me net profit margin because net profit margin is what I've selected first. If I change this to revenue, you can see that now this gives me revenue. If I double click on this, this gives me all these values, which are the values of revenue from this data point, from this data set. Similarly, I would simply copy this formula for the next cell, which is this, and would change the reference from A28 to 29, which is this cell here, the second link cell. And now when I hit enter, this gives me OPEX margin. If I double click, I get this entire data set because OPEX margin is the second one that I've selected. If I change this to net profit margin, I would have these values. Now all I have to do is I have to create a scatter chart using this. So I would select this entire data set. I would go to insert, and here in scatter chart I would use a simple XY scatter chart. In this case I've selected more than what is required. Let me just select these 2 columns, and this is my scatter chart, and it is ready. Now if I go to the right, let me copy this here so that you can see side by side. Let me align this, and let me also get the chart here. So I have the chart here now. And let me align these three. Right, now you can see that when I make a change, if I make this EBITDA margin, then this chart instantly updates itself with the new data set. And I'm telling you that this is a very practical example. I have used this chart many a times in my work, and this is very insightful, because instantly you would see that there is a trend. For example, if I see revenue and net profit margin, instantly I would know that most of the companies are not with high revenue and net profit margin. Most of the companies lie here in this range, which means that the profit margin is low for most of the companies, and which instantly helps you in identifying companies or whatever you want to do with this. But this is a very good chart, and I've used it in a lot of my office work. Now you may also want to make this chart title dynamic. So again, a very simple way is to just say this value ampersand quote versus double quote closes ampersand this value. And now when I hit enter, this gives me revenue versus net profit margin. I would simply go to the chart title, click equal to sign, and give this cell reference, and instantly I have this reference here. I can change the formatting a bit so that it looks a little neat here. Now as soon as I make any change, if I make this OPEX margin, you can see that this changes along with the data changes as well. One of the things that you must be noticing here is that the scale changes a lot whenever you make a selection. This is because of the nature of this data. Here I have revenue, which is probably in millions, and OPEX margin, EBITDA margin, and net profit margin, which is in percentage. But in case you have data set where these are all in percentage, then you can fix this between 0 and 1 and 0 and 1, and then your axis would not move. But this is a very efficient way to plot a scatter chart. If you have to identify clusters, you can use this technique. So this is it in this video. I hope you found this useful. Thank you and have a nice day.